good. As I said in the short earlier, I do believe the thing that's going on in DC is going to change van life in the counties. I was watching, Cheap RV Living for Bob, and he says it doesn't affect us because it doesn't affect us in the normal way. But I'm going to show you how it will affect us. I'm going to explain some of the problems and what my thoughts are with the city and whatnot, with the homeless people, the van lifers, RV people. Because I can see both sides on this. I can see a lot of sides on this. But I will tell you how this will affect outlanders like myself, where we live out in the county. We're not, we get away from society. Yeah, Freedom Phil, like, subscribe, let's get into it. Always turn up the video speed. And why do I say that? Because you watch videos faster. You should watch this at least at 1.5 to 1.75. Let's get into it. Also, sub horn, appreciating subs. All right, so it's like this. When it comes to a lot of the situations with the homeless in the cities, let's be honest, in these huge Democrat cities, this has been allowed to happen for years. People talk about, they're just poor, they're not hurting anybody, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes true, sometimes not. You really want to know that part of the reason this problem exists is it's kind of like feeding the birds, and the birds become dependent. If you go way back in time, this is ages ago, before this problem was even a thing, we couldn't even conceive it. There was always homeless people, but why it's ramped up and got as bad as it is. Back in the day when you were a nutcase, they put you in a rubber room. And at some point, the cost of putting people in rubber rooms, probably people that used too many drugs in the 60s, people that came back from Vietnam all screwed up, some people were just screwed up. The cost of putting people in there was a huge amount. And there's also a constitutional argument to say, well, you can't just put people in a rubber room for the rest of their life because they think weird. What if they're not hurting anybody? And so at some point, I don't remember if it was the late 70s or the early 80s, they just said, okay, well, it's unconstitutional to keep these people. So they just opened the doors and said, good luck. And for the people that had families, maybe they had families to go back to. But there was a large segment of the population that didn't have anywhere to go to. They were probably already alienated from their family by the time that they were getting put in a rubber room. And, in some cases, some of the parents and family members, they preferred the psychiatric ward because then it just took the burden off their back and they could get on with their lives. In the same way that a lot of people, breathe a sigh of relief when their aging relative of Alzheimer's finally drops dead, because, it is a burden. But these people got released out into the public. And inevitably what ended up happening is if you couldn't function in society before, because you're wearing your underwear on the outside, maybe they could bum change, maybe they could do some things. They weren't doing good before. Now they're out there. And what happens is some of them end up causing, drugs, crime, whatnot. And then of course, you had the crack epidemic, didn't help things a bit. Heroin, crack. Now we have fentanyl, meth, crack still, greatest hits, man. It's still around. Of course, the boozing, the problems, and now you've got homeless people just dropping dead from fentanyl. Like, was it something like last year? 300,000 people died from fentanyl poisoning, overdoses. So, to some degree, I think some of these cities, I'm just being honest, I think their outlook is like, this problem is slowly killing itself off, but it's not. And we come to the reason that some of these people wouldn't be as bad off as they are. They wouldn't get into the heavy drugs if they had a normal life to begin with. And that comes down to the cost of rent. One of the solutions I would say is we need to build, storage unit size apartments where you got a men's building, you got a women's building, and then you got like a public gym with showers, and you get these people back on their feet. And, you need these affordable workers, maybe get rid of some of these illegal workers so these people could actually get a fucking job. But they need affordable living. People aren't willing to do that. Well, that'll lower the cost of my value of my land. No, actually, it'll probably raise it, because if your city isn't plagued, don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with RV people. But there's a lot of trashy people, like drug addicts, that are now getting a shekel. Let's go back to the whole homelessness thing. What they found was it cost more to put these people in prison than it was to give them a check, and hopefully a sliver-sized apartment to where they could just live in their little apartment, and they probably did drugs or drank or whatever, but they weren't in jail, which say 40 to 50,000 versus 10,000 a year. So it's not giving a person that's like that a place to live isn't necessarily a total solution. You actually have to give them a purpose. But there's some people who don't want a purpose. And so there's a lot of them that just take the money and effectively they just put an RV, a Cousin Eddie RV on the streets, and then they have one or two cars parked next to it and some dogs and a crazy girlfriend that, and a handful of, other homeless buddies, and they live in warehouse districts. Yeah. They try to generally, I'm going to tell you the truth, a lot of them try to stay away from residential districts. And the reason is that people will call the cops. They'll get hassled. But when it starts getting into residential districts, that's because your warehouse districts are already full. And one of the problems that you'll see with some of the homeless is they'll be almost like this, like some of them are, let's be honest, pretty low IQ. And so they'll basically, someone will have a beef with someone else and they'll burn down their tent or they'll light their RV on fire. No, people don't need that shit on the streets. So I agree with a lot of the people that live in the cities. They're like, hey, look, man, they're taking up all the parking. They're leaving garbage everywhere. They're yelling crazy stuff. They're breaking into our cars. Fuck them. I totally get your mentality on that. But there's also the situation, like I've often said, okay, well, I've seen cases where guys were living in RVs. Like it was in Salt Lake. I was parked on the side of the road with my truck, my Peterbilt with a trailer. I was unloading at this place that night. And there was a bunch of people that were living in the RVs that actually worked in the warehouse district. So, they just have their RV and a bicycle. And then basically maybe their girlfriend to keep an eye on their place, or they'd have another homeless buddy keep an eye on their place during the day, because they got the RVs next to each other. So they all kind of watch out for each other, kind of like a little tribe, a nomadic tribe, gypsy tribe. But it's the cost of living. So then how does this affect us van lifers that are more out in the wilds? Where do you think they're going to push these people off to? The only reason people stay in the cities is because, okay, so here's the resources, here's the water, here's the food bank, here's the soup kitchens, food bank, soup kitchens, the resources they need. Their card gets full EBT. They hop on their bicycle or hell drive their car and go get what they need. Hell, their drug dealer, if they happen to be on some shit, is in that area. Now, when you're forced outside of the city, here's what'll happen. The immediate places outside of the city will be saturated. And you see this like when I used to go down to the wasteland, like St. George, out south of St. George, the Arizona area, out in the Black Rock Road area. There's a ton of them out there. And then if you go, I think it's the River Road area, bunch of broken glass and stuff. Sometimes you'll see like a destroyed RV. Some of those campers have been out there for years, so that's like someone's spot, like they're locals or something. But you see a ton of it. And the problem is eventually what ends up happening is that you have a lot of good people out there. You even have rich van lifers. People have a nice RV or a nice van. They're not the problem. But when you have all these scruffers that were the problem in the city kicked out of the city, they are going to infest the next acceptable area, which the long-term effect will be that those places that used to be accessible by they're going to put up roadblocks, ecology blocks. They're going to make laws that say you can't camp out here. You can visit during the day, but you can't camp out here at night without a permit or something. They're going to put some sort of permit system. So at the very least, if they do a permit system where, you got to pay like $100 a year, or like, $20, but you got to move every, they're going to put a fee to it. That's what they did in Washington, by the way. They have that with the Discovery Pass out there in Western Washington. I don't know if they still have that, but like you're parked on some public road up in the DNR, place you've gone your whole life, and some guy rolls up, you have your Discovery Pass? I'm like, what? We've been camping up on this top of this bunker since we were children. When did this happen? We got to have your Discovery Pass or write you a ticket. So that's probably what will happen in the beginning. But if there becomes too much trash, it'll be just like what happened on the West Coast. They'll start gating off roads. They'll start, maybe during hunting season, they'll open an area up. And after that, the gate will be slammed shut. And there'll be a bunch of places that you used to know, that were your places. You could, I remember when I lived in the woods in my early 20s, you could drive the 5,000 block And yeah, there was occasionally an old camper somewhere. Maybe people thought they were cooking meth or something, whatever. But you could go all over that area. You could drive the whole of Striped Peak. When I was a really, really little kid, you could actually drive from Freshwater Bay over to Salt Creek Recreation. That was a long, long time ago. And then they blocked off that road up there on Striped, so there was the loop. You know, you could go up there, and there's where the old fire spot or the thing. They have these huge cannons during the World War II out there at Salt Creek. But they also had spotting areas, spotting bunkers up the hills. So you could drive literally on top of one of the bunkers, and we used to have campfires up there and stuff. But all that's gone, and a lot of it's gone because they would claim it's because people were dumping garbage or people were cooking meth. But you'd go back in there, go hiking, and you'd see the same fucking garbage. You also had illegal brush pickers, like people from Colombia or Ecuador or whatever, Mexico, whatever. And they'd be going in there, and a bunch of illegals, picking all the brush, picking all the berries, picking all the stuff. And the Border Patrol was always chasing those people. But yeah, a lot of places I knew that were normal places you could go camping when I was a kid are gone now. And I think what'll happen is in a lot of places like in the wasteland, it will amp it up. It will amp it up in a huge way that a lot of people can't comprehend it. Because the same problems that you have in the city right now of the street shitters, and by the way, ironically, out in the county, you could just set up one of those 8x8 or 10x10 wall tents. One of those deals where there was no floor on the bottom. You have the telescopic deal, deep ass hole, and use it as a latrine, and then have a little area you could shower. They'd actually be better off to some degree out in the wasteland than they would be in the city. But then again, in the cities, they could just go use the 7-Eleven bathroom or the bathroom at the, whatever public facility or, at the homeless shelter. So it's kind of a mixed bag on that, But once they get out there and they start leaving garbage, and they start having, it'll probably be a little less conflict out there. There'll still be a lot of drugs. There'll be a lot of problems. And then there'll be people leaving cars or trash or whatever. So it'll be up to the public to show up and clean it up. And then eventually the public will get sick of cleaning up someone else's mess over and over again. And that's when the gates will show up. So a lot of people will tell you it's not going to affect us Outlander style van lifers. We're out there, but eventually it will. Places that used to be closer to the city. And by the way, I don't even really like being close to the city. I don't. I'd rather be in the county where it's quiet, and there's less scragglers around. You go to the city for resources. You go there to bum change, or you go there to, and I know people are like, you bum change? Yeah, I'm pretty good at it actually, but that's a whole side conversation. You go to the bum change, and you go there to, and you just pass through. You don't become an eyesore. That's the problem with a lot of these homeless people. They make it their it's just their thing. It's just their area. It's just their kind of range, And then they never leave. And then that actually, this, like when I've said the reason I don't like bumming change in the cities is because it's like fished out. Well, there are people who've got to the point where they're bummed out. There's been too many bums. And then the laws get passed, and the things, and then they start hassling you. And I'd just rather be in the county. I'd rather just pass through that town and go check out what's nice there. And that to me makes way more sense than this whole thing of, in the cities where it's like, you got crazy scragglers running around, people lighting people's tents on fire or even their RVs. And the drugs, the street shit, or fuck all that. Out in the wilderness is good. But like I said, the more of those people, because if you're not getting these people into housing, then they're going to just move their RVs out where they won't get hassled. And that will be in the places that a lot of us already are at. And so I guess the answer to some degree, and the problem is that it won't just be the adjacent areas that they ban. It will be everywhere eventually. So peace. Y'all take it easy.